Our next speaker, Dr. Sucheta Paranspe, is going to thread even further, and she is going to talk to us about textiles in ancient Indian literature. But I would like to introduce Dr. Paranspe to you before that. Dr. Sucheta Paranspe is a very well-known Sanskritist and Vedic scholar based in Pune. Learning and teaching Sanskrit was Sucheta ji's dream and mission since her high school days. Because of that, even though she had a state rank and most people at that point of time would have chosen science stream and become doctors or engineers, Sucheta Tai actually decided that she wanted to take up Sanskrit Adhyayan and Adhyapan as a career, and she has been doing that ever since. She completed her graduate and postgraduate degree in Sanskrit from Pune University. She collected all possible prizes and scholarships for Sanskrit studies. She is a fellow of the Fergusson College. She holds a PhD in Sanskrit and is an acknowledged Vedic scholar. She has worked as a professor of Sanskrit at Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth. She has worked at Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune in their prestigious Mahabharat project, and she's still a scholar on the Mahabharat project. It's a mission of a lifetime. She is the visiting faculty of Sanskrit at Macalester College, US, and Leipzig University in Germany. She is a very popular speaker on subjects related to Sanskrit literature and Vedic literature. And today she's going to talk to us about the mention of weaving and textiles in ancient Sanskrit and Buddhist and Jain literature. Over to you, Sucheta Tai.
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Tantrameke yuvati virupe abhyakramam vayata shanmayukham pranya tantu stirate dhatta anya napa vrunjate nagamato antam. Just as Sonal ji right now said in her amazing speech that we all begin our prayer, we begin the speech with prayer, so have I done that, and I begin my speech with this prayer in the Vedic literature. Incidentally, before I go ahead, let me tell you one thing. I will be speaking mostly about weaving and weavers as they are mentioned in ancient literature. And by ancient, I really mean ancient, right from Rigveda onwards. Okay? Now, I won't go into the details of the period of Rigveda, but generally it is accepted that it was composed in 3000 BC, which means it is 5000 years before today that Rigveda was composed, and whatever I say is true of period which is 5000 years before this. Excuse me, mother. Tuza, please. I was just checking with my video and all. It's okay.
It's okay. Your video, audio, everything is okay. So you can continue.
In Rigveda, we have this idea of weaving. And why does this idea come on and off? And for that, I must tell you how the whole thing worked. I think when originally man started living his life, we all know that there are three necessities of life. The first one is anna, food. The second one is nivara, that is shelter. And the third is vastra, that is, of course, garments or clothing. Now, what happened was when the man started living in forests maybe or on the rocks and hills and everything, anna was provided by nature. Initially, I'm talking about the initial stage. They could survive by eating fruit and even kanda, as we call them, roots. They could have milk of the animals and they survived. Caves gave them shelter. Sometimes even big trees gave them shelter. But what would they do for the clothing, for vastra? And that time, they must have started using what we call vulcula or the bark of the trees. So they took out the bark, draped them around their bodies, and that is how the need for clothing was fulfilled. But just see, just as food and shelter also kept on growing and progressing, garments, vastra also did that. And so people started thinking of new ideas, and this is my reasoning behind the whole thing, that man has learned everything from nature. Sonalji told us just now how we watch nature and learn so many things. So what happened was, probably man learned to spin the yarn from spiders. Imagine that. Or man learned to weave looking at the way the birds make their nests. You must have seen. And there is one word, it is called baya in Marathi or sugaran. It is called a weaver bird in English. So you would realize that weaver birds, they were doing weaving, and from that man must have got the idea, and they started having what we call warp and weft. But before that stage, there was another thing. And this thing was wool, the raw material. They had lots of sheep and goat. They were shepherds, the Rigvedic people, and they were also cattle grazers. So they had lots of wool, and from which they cleaned the wool. They made yarn out of the wool. Just imagine how they made yarn of the wool, and they started what we say knitting. So knitting you can even do with your hands. So that is how it must have started, and later on they used some other material, maybe sticks and all, to make a woolen cloth. You will be surprised. But in the excavations of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, spinning yarn, not exactly yarn, but spinning discs have been found. And it is a piece of cloth has been found at Mohenjo-daro. It is yet to be investigated into details, but there is a piece of some kind of garment in Sindhu Samskriti, that is Indus Valley civilization. If you remember, there are two famous statues from Indus Valley excavations. One is the Nartaki, who stands in a pose of a Nartaki with her right hand on her hip. And the second one is called Purohita, the priest. He is a priest. I mean, this is the guess of the scholars. But what is very important, that he wears, actually more than wear, he drapes something around his body and over his shoulder, something like the toga of the Romans. Right now, Sonalji mentioned that non-stitched clothes. So these non-stitched clothes, even our sari or dhoti, they are actually non-stitched clothes. You wear them, you don't wear them, you drape them along. So this is how weaving started. And weaving became a part of their life. So much so that you will be surprised that very soon they thought of a loom. And of course, in those days, it was a hand loom. There was no other way. You will not believe me, but in Rigveda, there is a word which is tantram. My prayer with which I started, it is from Atharva Veda, but it says there are two young women who stand facing each other. One of them stretches the thread and the other one weaves. This is the description of warp and weft, as we all know. I won't go into the details. Not only that, there is Mayukha. Mayukha is the place where all the thread is hanging so that it remains straight and stiff. To do that, they later on, not in Vedic times, I mean, at least there is no mention but small balls of lead. So the words which I said just now tells you Tantrameke Yuvati Virupe, and they not only have Mayukha, but they also have what we call Tasara. Tasara, it shuttles. Tasarani Chakruhu. Now just imagine they have a handloom, they have shuttles, they know about warp and weft, which means right in the Vedic period, the art of weaving had gone way ahead than what we might imagine. We all think that it is ancient times, people didn't know anything, but they knew a lot of things, and all this are there. Since weaving was a part of their daily life, you know who used to weave, who used to spin the cotton, not exactly only cotton, but the yarn out of the raw material, it was always the women. The women would do that. They were delicate workers and they would do it very finely. I think even today, embroidery, except for professional tailors, embroidery at home level is always done, or stitching at home level is always done by women. They are good at that art. So weaving became part of what we have about Rigveda is only poems, right? We don't have any excavation site for Rigvedic period up till now. So in the poetry, we get evidences. And what kind of evidence we have? What kind of proof? There are these two deities, Usha and Nakta. Usha Sanakta they are called. That is dawn and evening, both twilights actually. So Usha Sanakta, what Usha does, she weaves, just remember this, they use these words, Usha Sanakta Vayeva Ranvite, Vayi Iva. Like Vayi, the female weaver, they weave the net of thread and sometimes of darkness and light and darkness, and they spread the cloth over the world. So you would realize that even the similes come from their own imagery which are related to this weaving. Honorable Sonalji gave us lots of examples from the ancient times, but I will give you some examples from Rigvedic times. There are different types of clothes which are mentioned, and of course some clothes were not stitched, which were just draped along, but some were stitched with a needle. There is a reference to a needle in Rigvedic suktas, that is poems, and it says sucha, that is suchi, you know, achidyamanaya, a needle which does not have an eye. And you must have noticed that the way the surgeons stitch a wound, suturing, that needle doesn't have a eye, and what they do is, we know how they do it. Or even the people who stitch your torn shoes and all, you know, cobblers, they also do the same thing. So there is a reference of Sucha Achidyamanaya, which means clothes were stitched, and stitched according to your size, according to your choice, according to even climate. She mentioned just now that a lot of things depend on, like this, she said, this is my summer wardrobe. So even those people must be thinking of that. And with this, they not only stitched clothes, but they also embroidered it. And there are references in Rigveda that young women wear beautiful clothes. They are decked up by their mothers because they are going for some gathering where they will meet a partner for life, probably. In Samana, it is called. So when they go there, they do a lot wonderful hairstyle, Chatush Kaparda, 4 types of different hairstyle, and Yuvati Supeshaha. Peshas is Vastra. Peshas is something which is a Vastra which is woven. Okay? And these women, when they go there, these vastras, these garments, are not ordinary ones. They have gold embroidery, hiranyapesha. We know the word hiranya, gold. Later on, we have references even to Jatarupa, that is silver thread which embroiders the clothes. So you can imagine, when we talk about weaving and textile industry and Kanchipuram and Sambalpuram, please remember that all this has a history of 5,000 years. It's not only a history, it's a tradition. It's our culture, and therefore our culture is rich with weaving. So these women, they would wear this. There are so many other references to different types of clothes. For example, there is something called drapi. Now, drapi is something which is worn over your garment by people belonging to a higher social strata. Now, just imagine, this is what Rigveda tells you. All the deities like Varuna and all, they are wearing this drapi. Sometimes even women who belong to the noble families, there were not royal families then, but noble families would wear that. And I'm reminded that during the Peshwa times in Maharashtra, I mean, I have seen one such person even when I was young in Pune. They used to wear brocade jackets on the blouse, and they would wear a 9-yard sari. So that they stick to, but they used to wear brocade jackets, and that is very important. The tradition again belongs to Rigveda. So, which is very interesting. Then there is a discussion about Vikartana. Vikartana is a type of garment which is used mostly by young girls. And you know, V is Vishesha, so forget about that. Kartana, even today we know, Kartana, Kesha Kartanalaya. Kartana is to cut, and the word Karta and the English word skirt are phonetically almost the same. In fact, they are the same. And the linguist would tell you that Vikartana is nothing but V, that is a special type of Karta, that is skirt. So there were skirts that they were wearing when they were young. There was Uttariya, which was called Vasa, and the one which would they wear on their proper dress was called Adhivasa. There are wonderful and affectionate examples from this. As you know, Indra was the commander of the army of gods, right? And everybody wanted Indra to come to their side to fight for them. So one Ruk tells you that one Rishi is pulling at the Uttariya of Indra, just as a small child will pull at the Uttariya of his father to attract his attention. Can you believe this? I mean, not only about the different types of clothes, but even the feelings in Vedic literature are wonderful. More wonderful and, what should I say, very touching idea is, there is a sukta or a poem in Rigveda about what we call Antyeshti, the last funeral rites. It is Antya Ishti, the last yajna which you make, where you offer your body to fire. And after Antyeshti, even today, we collect the bones later on, and nowadays we kind of flow them off in a river or something. In those days, they would make a burrow in the ground and put the clay pot containing those bones and hide it. They would spread some earth on that. Just see how many customs are common all over the world. And this is how they would bury the bones. At that time, the Ruk, which says something beautiful, is, "O Prithvi, take care of this child of yours, just as a mother takes a baby under her achala." The word used in Rigveda is sicha. Just as the mother takes the baby under her achala, you also take him under your achala and care, protect, and love him. What a wonderful thing. But just as we have references to Antyeshti, there is a wonderful thing which I must tell you because that is important, and this tradition is used here, and I know someone in Pune who is going to talk to you about it later, and I will reserve that thing for her. The Vadhu or the bride, when she goes for wedding, of course she wears a very special, let's say sari, a dress, whatever they were wearing at that time. Even today, all over India, your wedding dress is something special. Here in Maharashtra, we always wear what is called Ashtaputri. Literally, it means something which you wear that you will have 8 sons, your 8 children. That is always yellow. In the north, I know they always wear red. There are some people, some states which wear white with red border. So Vadhu Vastra is a special thing. And this Vadhu Vastra, the Vadhu herself was supposed to weave. That is the most important thing. So the Vadhu would, it used to be called Shamulya. That Vadhu Vastra, which she takes over and above her dress. So it is something like what we call shela in Marathi. In Maharashtra, you wear a highly brocaded sari as a vadhu, and on top of that, you take a shela. So this shamulya was that. And it is in this context that the bride says, Rakam aham sushtutim. I offer my prayers to a deity called Raka. This Raka would give her the impel and inspiration to weave a beautiful Vadhu Vastra, Shamulya, and that she would weave and stitch, not stitch, right, with Sucha Achidyamanaya, with a needle which has no lip previously. So this is what that Vadhu talks about. Anyway, this Shamulya, which was so precious to her, was later on given away to the priest. I think the priests do even today, you know, whatever they can, they take away. But I feel sorry for that Vadhu because her Vadhu Vastra should always stay with her. I told you that it was the duty of the women to weave, knit, and also stitch clothes. There is a reference in Rigveda which says, Mata Putraya Vastrani Vayanti. The mothers, I think it is in Atharva Veda, the mothers weave clothes for their child. I have already talked about the loom. And I have already told you that there used to be mayukha, that is the thread hanging, and also shuttles, which is called tasara. After Rigveda comes Yajurveda. And in Yajurveda, we have words like vaya, which means a loom. A weaver. Veman is loom, vaya is a male weaver, and Vayatri is female weaver. In Rigveda, there is a special word for a female weaver, and that is Siri. This Siri is mentioned many times where Siri is supposed to be the best female weaver. So coming to Yajurveda, Veman, Vaya, and Vayatri. But I want to read out some verses from Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda comes much later chronologically than Rig Veda, and you must remember that by then, over of say 500 years, a lot of mechanical and technical advancement had happened. Remember, these people could make a small needle. These people could build chariots. They could build a house with 100 doors. Sahasradwaram is used in Rigveda, which means they were mechanically much better than what we think they were. So anyway, in Atharva Veda, I would read two ruchas from there. It says, the first one I already started my talk with, Tantra meke yuvati virupe. So they face each other, one pulls the thread and one with the shuttle weaves the cloth actually. And the most important is there is again a description of Vadhu Vastra. It is called Vivaha Vastra, which is made from Vanaspati, because the entire mantra is addressed to Vanaspati, and it says, "O Vanaspati, help me build and weave this wonderful Vadhu Vastra. Ye anta yavati sicho ya otavo ye cha tantavaha." This is the most important thing. What all does that Vadhu Vastra have? Anta, the end. Sicha. Sicha is something like Pallu, Achal, Padar in Marathi. So Sicha is that. But Ye Otavaha, Ye cha Tantavaha. This Ota and Tanta, Tantu, we use the word Tantu even today when something gets stretched. And so that is Vap. And Otavaha is that which is interwoven, and so that is weft. So these words are used in Atharva Veda. You will be surprised that these words, and I already told you that Tantra meant this thing, the loom, hand loom actually. So when you talk about words like Tantra and Sutra and all those things, you realize that it was so popular in those days, and it was so commonly done thing of using looms and threads and weaving clothes out of that, that in Sanskrit literature, there is a whole genre of literature which is called Sutra Vangmay. So the word sutra, of course, they give different meaning to that word sutra, aphorism and all, but basically the word has come from weaving pattern. And tantra, we know tantra mantra, that's how we talk about all those vidyas. So tantra is a loom which is also a name given to a different type of literature. So that is very important. Now, did they use only bark of the trees and all? Of course not. They used wool, and when they shear the wool, they also use the skin. The word is ajina. Aja is sheep, and the skin of the aja is called ajina. But later on, you know, people started using words like mrugajina. Mruga is deer. Deer skin is also used, but mruga and ajina don't go together. It is like saying the goat skin of a deer. So we will avoid using that. We would say mruga charma. Later on, not in Rigvedic times, Rigveda does not time, even Vyagra charma was used. Even silk was used. It used to be called tarpya. So it was either done from grass, then it was not silk, or it was called triparya. If it was made from grass, it would be called tarpya. And kshauma, Sonalji has already mentioned that kshauma and kausheya is called silk. Now look at the word kausheya, comes from the word kosha, which is cocoon, and we all know how on the mulberry tree, we know the whole process. So that which comes from kosha is also called cocoon. I must tell you at this stage itself that in one of the later sutras, Anuyoga Sutras, there is a mention of 3 types of fabric. You know which they are? Andaja, Bondaja, and Kridaja. Anda, by the way, is a Sanskrit word. If you remember the word Hiranyagarbha, Brahmanda. If you see the word Brahmanda, Anda is embryo, Anda is the beginning of creation. So Andaja, now what kind of things they used, we don't know exactly. But the commentators tell you that they used the eggs of swans. Bondaja. Bonda is something, the word which is used even today for the cotton flour. Bond. So this is when cotton was commonly used, and Kridaja is actually silk which comes from the cocoon. So this is how it was used. Now after this, I want to talk about Gargi, because the topic for this webinar is wonderful. It is in ancient, the topic which was given to me was ancient Indian weaving from ritual to spiritual. I quite like that. How this entire thing went from ritual, that is weaving patterns and all, to spiritual is very important. In Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is a famous female philosopher called Gargi. We know this word, name and word. And this Gargi, she goes to the court of King Janaka Vaideha and challenges Yajnavalkya, the great philosopher, and tells him, "O Yajnavalkya, this is all earth and I can see water everywhere. Kasminnu khalu idam apaha, na iyam apaha, otascha protascha iti." So the similar imagery from weaving, she is using even for philosophy. In what is this water contained? What sustains this water? Then he gives some answer, Vayu. Then she say, and Vayu, kasmin etad etah otascha protash, esha etascha protascha. So you would realize that she uses these words to describe philosophical concepts, and Yajnavalkya understands them, and Yajnavalkya also answers them in the same way. After that, we go to the epics. I must run hurriedly because there is so much to talk. After that, in the Ramayana, Ramayana comes before Mahabharata. This is what we typically say. So in the Ramayana, again, I am not going to go into the details of different types of clothes, but I want you to know that the different types of weaving patterns are mentioned in Ramayana. Remember, when Dasharatha died, Bharata was not in Ayodhya. He was in with his Matula, maternal uncle, that is Kekaya. He was staying there. And when he came back, his Matula presented him with 100 amazing vastras, adbhutani vastrani, which had different weaving pattern. We don't know what exactly they were, and there are experts here. Sonalji, maybe next time you can talk about this, the 100 types of different adbhutani vastrani. Not only that, remember that when Bharata goes down to Chitrakuta to meet Rama, when he comes to know everything, you know whom he meets? He meets, on his way, he meets people like Sutra Karma Visheshanya. I need not tell you the meaning. Sutra Karma, experts of spinning the yarn. And also he meets Kambalaka. Kambala is of course made from wool, and so he also met wool weavers. I was reminded of that Baba Kali Kambali Wale from Rishikesh. So there were these people who used to do that even in those times. When we come to Mahabharata, there again, you know, the vastras and weaving is used. Only when they mention it in, when they are given as gift. Remember, Yudhishthira did a Rajasuya. At that Rajasuya, many people gave him many things like money and some small villages and some vastras. We use the word vastra pravarana. Pravarana is what we wear on top, like I told you, drapi and adhivas, etc. So these Vasav, all the kings gave Yudhishthira wonderful vastras. Even today, for whatever the ceremony, we always give a piece of cloth, or it could be a shawl, it could be a sari, it could be anything, but we always give cloth. So what they got was, Yudhishthira got from the king of Bojastras, and they were made important, which I will read out to you. Aurnan, Vailan, Varshadanshan, Jata Rupa Parishkrutan. And Ajino, of course, that I will mention. Vailan and Aurnan. Urna is wool. So Aurnan is woolen clothes, which we can understand. But what is Vaila? Vaila is translated as rat hair. And Varshadansha is translated as cat hair. I'm giving you the English synonyms for that. The commentators tell you that. And the moment we think of hair, you know, I can't imagine I'm taking out the hair of rat and weaving something out of that. But if I say the fur of the cat, or when these people use fur coats, and then what are they? They are actually hair along with the skin, and sometimes not with the skin, but only the hair. Don't get scared by the word rat hair. It is the fur of some rodents, you know. So he was given these type of, and even all the other brothers who went to 4 directions for Ashwamedha, they also got, there is a list of things, you know, which they got from different types of raw material, clothes which were made from different types of raw material and which were woven in different countries. I must talk at least a little about Kautilya. Kautilya in his Arthashastra says amazing things. He says that every king, you know that he gives you a list of things which a king, how should he rule his kingdom. And there used to be a Sutradhyaksha. Sutra, again, thread, but he would supervise how weaving was conducted in his kingdom. This Sutradhyaksha was supposed to look after the fact that all the raw material was provided to people who spin for them, you know. And these people would necessarily be women, old women who could not leave their house, sick women, I mean not very sick, but those who could not come somewhere else, and prostitutes, even some ascetic women. And all these women, if they could not come to the place of work, remember, the raw material, Sutradhyaksha would see to it that the raw material would be given to these women. I remember in Pune, where I lived, there was an office of Lijjat Papad. Everybody in India knows this brand. And these Lijjat Papad people in those days would go from door to door of these women and give them the raw material so that they could make the papads. And we now talk of women empowerment and Alpa Bachat Gat and whatnot. All these things were already there in Kautilya's time. Kautilya mentions a huge list of various places, you know, like Mathura, Kalingaka, Kashika, Vangala, and many others, just as we talked just now, or we listened to just now about Sonalji talking about this Sambalpur and Maheshwari and this and that. But the Naga weavers of Kalinga were so famous that in those days in Tamil Nadu, the word for cloth was Kalinga. So you can see how Kalinga and cloth and woven cloth had become one and the same. Even Buddhist and Jaina literature has this. In fact, in Divyavadana, this is very interesting. A text called Divyavadana, there is a description of how they used to weave on looms. And they say, The entire story goes like this. First, the weaver would come and take away his ushnisha, that is his headgear, keep it on the floor. Then his wife would give him an intoxicating drink called Divya Sudha. I don't know why they needed it, but they needed it obviously. And then after taking that, he would look up and then start moving his hands and feet at the same time. And his wife stood by him to stretch the thread, and this is how the weaving was done. There is also Tundila and Mahajanaka Jataka, where there are references to weaving. We won't go into that, but in Jaina text, there is a text called Jambudvipa Pradnyati, and there it is said that all these people, the weavers, they belong to a lower, not caste, but lower category, lower social strata. And if they learn to show their skills and weave a pattagara, that is a silk fabric, then they will uplift themselves. So see, the weaving, the upliftment of weavers and everything was always there in our literature. Now I better come to the recent things, only a couple of things, and this is part of my ritual, spiritual weaving and all those things. Sonalji, she recited the entire Jini Chadariya, which was part of my talk also, but she has already talked about it. But there is one more doha of Kabira, which loosely translated would be something like this, you know. It says, Kabira is talking to Rama or Rahim or whatever. He says, "Oh God, on the loom of my mind, I weave your name every time." But we have to remember that Kabira was an abandoned child. He was adopted by a weaver. So such imagery and such work will always be there. Even in Marathi, there are beautiful songs. Now that we are talking about Kabira, let me tell you, Kabirache Vinato Shele Kausalyecha Ram. Those of you who are Marathi, Maharashtrians, you would remember this. And there are many popular songs which have this image of weaving and making cloth to show some philosophy. For example, a beautiful song from a Marathi movie, Jagacha Pathivar, Ek Dhaga Sukhacha. So you would, if you go through the words, the lyrics carefully, you would realize how it is done. But I would like to end my speech or whatever, my little thing that I'm doing in front of you now at this webinar. I must mention one song, very recent song, maybe 50 years back, which was written by one poet called P. Savla Ram. Now see the name, Savla is dark complexion, Ram. So just like Kabira weaving his shela for Ram, even this fellow this poet has done this. And it of course says, you know, that Karacharanancha maga varati ubhe adave gumpuna dhage. He says he's talking to Vithala and he says, "Oh Vithala, on the loom of your hands and feet, Kara and Charana, what I am doing is I am weaving the threads of your name and my devotion." That is the most important thing. And he says, in that, when I use this loom, the tantu, mana manache tantu taka. Mana manache, that is with my mind, with my bhava, with my devotion, I do that. But just imagine, the next one is more important. He says this entire earth was, I mean, we know how the earth was created and we know latitudes and longitudes, which in Marathi and Sanskrit is called Akshansha and Rekhansha. And Savla Ram tells you, Akshanshache Rekhanshache Ubhe Adave Gumpuna Dhage Vividha Rangi Vasundhareche Vastra Vinile Pandu Range. Can you believe that? That what has Panduranga done? So using latitudes and longitudes, he has woven a colorful garment, colorful fabric for Vasundhara. And since he is the first weaver, because he wore the cloth for Vasundhara. What a global and universal imagery this is. Just try to imagine the proportion. And he says, therefore, I pray to you. But let me end on a very different note now. So weaving has become a part of our ritual, spiritual, and sometimes even in language, linguistic also, culture also has taken a lot from weaving. I won't go into the details now. But remember that when Gandhiji first thought of making use of the idea of Swadeshi, what he thought of was charkha, the spinning wheel. And even today, Khadi Gramodyog still thinks of spinning wheels, and that had become the, what should I say, starting point of our Swadeshi movement. We cannot forget that. And so you would know that right from Rigveda through all the other Vedas, Upanishads, Ramayana, Mahabharata, all this time, the looms have come up in a very big way, and they form an important aspect of our culture. But what is very important is that the tradition still flows on. In spite of the Industrial Revolution in Manchester, where the British came, you know that, the British came and they cut the fingers of the weavers in Varanasi. What a cruel thing to do. You can cut the fingers, you cannot cut the skills, and you cannot cut the traditions. And therefore, it will go on. It is a dhaga, it is a tantu, it is otam and protam, and that never has an end. It will flow on and on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sucheta Bai. It was one of the most Amritvani, truly, as somebody commented. The way you took us on a journey of 5,000 years, all the way from Rigveda to Kautilya's Arthashastra to Jain literature to epics. It was beautifully referenced, well researched talk, and obviously, I mean, as a teacher, I told you that the only one word that I can think of is you're very endearing, your whole personality, the way you explain things. It khub good hai. The song that you talked about, Eka Dhaga Sukhacha, Shambar Dhage Dukhache, Jaratari He Vastra Manava Vinale Ayushache.
Tujiya Ayushache.
Tujiya Ayushache. It is a beautiful analogy which takes place the warp and the weft, and it talks about
I would have loved to go into details, but you know, we are running short of time, so but I like that. Sorry, go ahead.
Ask you a couple of questions. Like, as I listened to your talk, I realized that there are a lot of English words today used in relation to textiles, which look like their roots are actually in Sanskrit. For example, drape. Could it have come from drapi? Sutures. Could it have
Of course, it has. I told you about kartana, vikartana and skirt. So drapi and drape are same, and drapi used to be draped, you know. And some other time we will talk about this, the similarity between ancient Indian and modern things, not only linguistically but culturally.
Okay, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, and it was more than I expected, and I'm truly again, this is a talk that I'm going to listen to again and again, because the information is so rich and it is so beautifully well researched and referenced.
Glad you liked it.
Not take all of it in. But thank you so much, Sucheta Bai. I would like it very much if you stayed for the future sessions.
I do plan to.
Okay, that'll be
and
wonderful.
All the best to Pushyamitra Joshi.
Yeah, he's a very young guy who's done a lot of work in natural dyes. He's an entrepreneur as well. So he would definitely like you to stay on. And once again, thank you very, very much. And I look forward to meeting you in person to talk more about this.
Wait till lockdown is lifted up. Not during lockdown.
Yeah, definitely not during lockdown.
Later. Sure.
But thank
Okay.
you so
Thank
much.
you once again. Bye.
Hope that
Thank you.